everything that I've ever read about this topic, it's always this conversation. It's always very upfront. It's always very like, hey, this is what it is. This is the variance, yada, yada, yada. So then when we hear a Bart Ehrman create this, there's more variance than there are words, and there's 250,000 gajillion million. I'm being hyperbolic, but hundreds of thousands of variants.
I actually disagree with Bart Ehrman. I think there are more variances than Bart Ehrman even thinks there are.
Okay.
So he says 300,000. I think I go with Eldon Epp's number, which is closer to 600,000.
Okay. So is that a red herring though? Because what he's implying, even though he's not saying it, and he'll only answer it when he's getting pressed on it, is you're saying there's 300,000, 600,000 variants, but when we get down to the nitty gritty of what are these variants, all of a sudden it seems like we're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah, it's a non-starter. I think it's a distraction because it's meant to shock for people who don't know what they don't know. Every person who's done text criticism or manuscript studies or paratextual features like I study hears that and goes, okay, what are they? Because it's not the number of the variances, it's the nature of the variances, because that's what matters in this conversation. It also, we have to factor in, we in English have standardized spelling, and word order makes a big difference in English. That's not true in Greek. In ancient Greek, the standardization of spelling happens a long time after the vast majority of the manuscripts. So you can you can spell John with one H, two H's, one N, two N's. Those would be counted as textual variants. But if you can say, okay, 600,000 textual variants. Okay, well, we also have to keep in mind that that number is encompassing close to 6,000 witnesses, right? So you have a lot of manuscript evidence that you're dealing with. So when you have two manuscripts, you're going to have a handful of variances. When you have thousands of manuscripts, you're going to just be dealing with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of variants. But if we actually get down to the nitty gritty and we see that upwards of 99% of those variances have no impact when we translate them into English, then who cares?
Yeah. So do you think we're going to discover more manuscripts?
I hope so.
What was the last big discovery? Was it Dead Sea Scrolls, or was it more current ones?
No, we're discovering manuscripts year upon year.
Like recently, there's been stuff discovered.
Yeah, and part of the issue is that even some of the manuscript discoveries that were, say, pulled out of the sands of Egypt in the 20th century, a lot of those are just sitting in drawers in places like Oxford University.
Like they haven't even been examined; they're just sitting there.
I wouldn't say I'm going out on a limb and saying that most of the Oxyrhynchus papyri, the close to 500,000 papyri that were discovered between 1864 and 1867, have not been either analyzed or published because a good portion of them are incredibly fragmentary. So like I've been to Oxford and I've you pull out the drawer and it's confetti. And so the amount of effort, this was the issue with the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. Like they're so fragmentary that it takes so much time to reconstruct them that the legwork to be able to do that is just not worth a lot of people's time. And so, but manuscripts are being published every year. So the Egyptian Exploration Society has a publication that they do. I don't know how annually they do it, but they did it in 2014, and they published 3 new manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, one of which was very important because it had a section from Luke and a section from Matthew and a section from what appeared to be the Gospel of Thomas on it. So that was P-Oxy 5575. And so we're publishing manuscripts and discovering manuscripts on a yearly basis.
Wow.
So that number that you sometimes hear of almost 6,000, we have to be careful with that because what textual critics mean when they throw out numbers like 5,800, they usually say witnesses. That doesn't equate to manuscripts.
Okay.
But a lot of them are manuscripts, but sometimes a witness is just something that's categorized within a number. So you could have one witness number that is more than one manuscript, or one manuscript that has a number of witness numbers. So we have to be careful with that number, and that's why you see it sometimes in flux. Sometimes you see 5,600, sometimes you see 5,300. I think the approximation of saying between 5,000 and 6,000 manuscripts is probably okay.
Yeah. And when you say we're discovering new manuscripts all the time, are you saying like how are these just pieces of little small pieces of manuscripts? Are we getting entire codexes of like, oh wow, we just discovered a new Gospel of John? Like, what are we discovering currently?
It depends on the age.
Okay.
So like we're discovering whole manuscripts of, say, the Gospel of John, hypothetically. But that usually happens from the Middle Ages.
Okay.
So like I think recently there was a 9th century one. It wasn't in Greek. I think it was in Georgian.
Interesting.
But that's happening.
Huh.
The thing is with the ancient manuscripts is that they're so old that of course they're so small. So this is why, you know, when I was on Rogan and I said the Great Isaiah Scroll, that scholars were shocked. What I was talking about, which I maybe should have clarified more, was they were shocked with the preservation of the Great Isaiah Scroll. Because this is something that is almost 200 years before Jesus. The fact that it is basically an entire copy of the Scroll of Isaiah was shocking because that very rarely happens.
Greatest archaeological discovery.
That's right.
According to a friend of ours.
Yeah, according to a friend of ours. And it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. And it was one of the first kind of
they were excited.
Scrolls that they pulled out. They were quite excited.
Yeah.
And so they were surprised by the preservation of it, as well as the fidelity of the text.
Yep.
And so that's unusual. Like we have a couple of instances. P66 is a almost entire copy of the Gospel of John for the late 2nd, early 3rd century. P75 is Luke and John. Yep. It's almost in its entire preservation. These things happen. The vast majority of the time, they're fragments.
Yeah. So they're pieces that they're finding.
They're little pieces, yeah.
And is it true that the idea of the codex, the book, the writing on the front and the back, is that true that was kind of coined by Christian scribes because the scrolls would open up this way, and so it just made sense to write on the front and the back because it was so expensive to produce these?
So we don't know the reason for it, but it is true that Christians didn't invent the book, but they were the ones that popularized it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there are a number of reasons. So when P52, which was the fragment that I gave, I made for Rogan, when it was discovered by C.H. Roberts in the basement of the John Rylands Library, one of the reasons he initially saw just off the bat that it was probably a Christian document was because it was written on the front and the back, right? So it was probably from a book. Christians were the ones who usually produced books. They weren't the ones who only produced books, but they were the ones who usually produced books. And so you could assume if it was written on the front and the back and it's in the kind of scribal hand that could be, you know, from 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, that it was a Christian document because the scrolls were just the norm.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out the video. Please be sure to comment below and subscribe and all that good stuff. And check out this other video that YouTube seems to be recommending just for you. Let me know if they nailed it. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.